And no less, by popular demand, we have Dr. Donkey, now, second only to James Harriet and Dr. Doolittle. Yeah.
Dentelski.
So Dr. Dentelski, not don't go around saying Dr. Donkey. You won't find him like that on Google. Dr. Avi Dentelski, I must say that the reactions already when you spoke were incredible, and
Thank
continuously
you.
thereafter, by popular demand, you have been summoned to teach us more. We have prepared ourselves by reading the relevant verses from 1 Kings 13. We have talked a little bit about that story. Obviously, there is so much to say about that story, but we've kind of reviewed the story itself. We've asked ourselves several questions. We did not answer any questions regarding the donkeys, but we did note the disappearance of the donkey there. And without further ado, I give us all Dr. Dentelski.
Thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much. Great atmosphere here, and save the applause for later. Let's see if I'm worth it. Okay, so let's share this presentation. Now, this time, it's almost good as before. I didn't have enough time to prepare it. So I actually had in mind two stories, narratives. 1 Samuel 9 and 10 and Kings 13. So let's try to, in the 60, maybe a bit more minutes to
Listen,
handle.
I don't think you'll have a stronger position if you decide to divide
Okay.
this into two
Ah,
meetings.
okay. Wow. Let me think, because the Samuel is more important in some kind of ways. Uh, okay. Let's start with Samuel and let's see how it's going on, okay? Because it's sort of you have to learn this in advance before diving into this.
No problem. We're all
Um,
ears,
so it's okay.
like big ears, brown
Donkey ears.
and
Yeah.
yeah.
We'll see later the Midas, King Midas, which had donkey ears. Okay, so let's start. I'll skip the prequel. I've made this prequel to remind us what we learned in the last session. All of these stories we look, what important is this? I brought from far away Erlich Auerbach from his Mimesis, the book where he analyzes literary from the Western culture, what he calls, and he started with the Odysseus card, where he compared that piece of the art from the Odyssey to the Binding of Isaac story, Genesis 22. And what he found out that was that the Homeric narrative, as you'll see, most of the modern novels today are abundant with details, many, many details. Only this little scar here has something like read 120 lines of epic to describe how did this scar became to be. And when he compared that or contrasted that, Genesis 22, he got to this conclusion at the end after he speaks a bit about the story, the binding story, how it unrolls no episodes in a few independent sentences, and how all the background is gone. There almost nothing is described, all else left in obscurity. The decisive points of the narrative alone are emphasized. What lies between is non-existent. Time and place are undefined and call for interpretation. Thoughts and feeling remain unexpressed. That's the basic thing we have to bear in mind when we approach a biblical narrative. It doesn't have anything in common with the what we call modern novels we're used to. And I even gave this example of Israeli novel that, never mind the Hebrew now, but this is a paragraph which describes the first meeting of a man and a woman. And this is a parallel paragraph of the Bible which describes the first meeting of Rachel and Jacob. Here we have many lines, here we have fewer lines. And what's more important, here we have very few verbs. All the rest is background and descriptions, feelings, kind of things, and even the blue dress. But here we have verbs which are escalating. We see most of the biblical narrative is dealing with actions, vayigash, vayagel, vayash, etc. And every word, there's not a single redundant word. So I asked, of course, we see so many donkeys and beasts and other stuff in biblical narratives, we have to ask ourselves, why are they there? And I suggested two theorems to explain that. The first, that a beast is a man or is men alike in the biblical mind. In the ancient times, that's what what they thought. And I've tried to prove that from several themes in the Bible, and even with this diagram, if you recall. And then I suggested that the biblical author used this, subconscious axiom that a man and beast belong to the same category, to use it as a literary mean in his narratives, to describe what we would call internal conflicts or human virtues, all kind of words that the biblical Hebrew doesn't even have. And I showed the stories, two famous talking animal stories in the Torah, even, that we saw there that the serpent is not a serpent, it's Eve. It's a bad wheel, if you like. And the Jenny is not a Jenny, it's Balaam himself, who is arguing with himself, like Eve argued with herself. And I try to suggest the same about Xanthus and Achilles' horse, which he also argue one with each other, that the same idea applies also here. And then I showed what I think the best example in the modern Western culture to these two theorems, Jesus as Agnus Dei. First of all, the lamb, I should say, and Nathaniel corrected me for I always say lamb, for the be there. Okay, so lamb, Agnus Dei, he is the lamb, and when we read, for example, I do in Isaiah about a lamb who's going to slaughter, we may think of Jesus, of course. Lamb is Jesus. It's obvious. The author used the lamb to represent Jesus, just for a sort of an anecdote. I finished with some anthropology. Really, if you can, Nathaniel, if you can.
There is I'll mute everybody. Yeah.
Thank you.
Don't forget to unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you. So I finished then with a bit of anthropology, all kind of examples from the wide world we're not always aware to. And I finished with this beautiful example from an article about the earthquake in Nepal, where the unofficial village leader described the death of his son, which has an age and a name, the same way he described the death of his ox and buffaloes, which had names and had age. So that sort of proves that in the ancient mind, or the primitive so-called mind, the man and beast are perceived in the same level of as you can see here. Now we can jump into the first narrative. I think makes it both. Yeah, it's not a problem. Of the story about Saul and the Jennies that went astray, and I'm calling them Jennies, as I said before, because she asked. But the KJV translation, which I'm going to use again, he uses here asses for some kind of reason, so I have replaced it. I hope the king will forgive me for that, but no choice. The Hebrew word is atonot. It's not donkeys.
Listen, they had a king there, and now they have a queen, so it stands to reason to change the donkeys as well.
Right, to feminine, right. So this story holds almost two chapters in First Samuel, and I guess most of us know the basic lines of the story. So let's only look at Jenny's story. I'll quote only the verses which refer to the Jennies. The first one is right at the beginning, and Jennies, Kish, Saul's father, were lost. Watch out, we have the Jennies here, Ha-atonot, as we're supposed to know them before. Now, some text critics suggest there is a sort of a dithography here. You see the hey here and the hey there, which makes sense, but after we'll see the entire narrative, we'll see that, no, it's the Atonot, the Jennies of Kish. And his father tells him, take one of the boys, the servants with thee, and go seek the Jennies. Again, you can already see the redundancy here, why it's not written, go seek them. So, Jennies here, why do we need the Jennies again? In Hebrew, it's even better. It's kum lech bakesh otan. Otan and aton, even sounds the same. He repeats, lech bakesh et ha'atonot. So he goes there and he goes there for 3 days and he couldn't find it. And then Saul starts to get worried because of his father. He said, let us return, let my father leave caring for the Jennies and take thought for us. Which means he knew that his father had great worry about those Jennies for some kind of reason. And he's afraid that his father will stop worrying for them and start taking care for him. I remind you from the last session, Jacob's relation to his sheep against his relation to his kids. He loved his sheep a bit more than the kids, as I showed before. Then the entire story is rolling on. He meets those, he comes to the town where his lad tells him that Samuel is about to be, and he meets Samuel, and then Samuel tells him this. He says, and as for thy jennies that were lost 3 days ago, set not thy mind on them, for they are found. They are found, which means they have already been found, or they are found right now. We'll see it later. And on whom is all the desire of Israel? Is it not on thee and on all thy father's house? Once again, it mentions father. That would be important, as we'll see later. And then I jump to chapter 10. This chapter is the, I would say, the turning point of the story. But here Saul becomes to another man. And Samuel commands him, you shall go today for me, and then you will meet people who will tell you. And once again, they will send to thee the jennies which thou wantest to seek are found. Lo, thy father hath left the care of the jennies, and sorrow through you, saying, what shall I do for my son? Once again, jennies here and the jennies there. Twice, once again, it's the jennies and not only take care of them, which should have been enough. Once again, his father, his warring father, he's so worried about the jennies, and now he's so worried about his son. What will happen to my son? So Saul turns to another man, and he starts to prophesy between the prophets, which are Samuel prophesied to him before. And then he comes back home, and all of a sudden he meets his uncle. Instead of meeting his father, as would have expected, his warring father, no, he stumbles upon his uncle, which starts to investigate him, inquisitive questions. Where did you go? He said, to look for the jennies. And what did he tell you? He told us that we found the jennies, but he didn't tell him, of course, of the matter of the king. That is a quick summary of the entire narrative. We see, going back, chapter 9, 4 jennies, mentioning of jennies. Chapter 10, once again, another 4 jennies. They're spread all around the place, once again, without almost no reason. I mean, who needs all of those jennies? I may quote here one of the famous Israeli scholar, literary scholar of the Bible, who asked, what importance can one find in a plain farmer whose jennies went astray, let alone the over-detailed quest after them? I mean, if you like to start the story with something, okay, so the jennies were lost. That's enough. Now on, the story has its own power. It doesn't need to, it shouldn't have remind us again and again and again and again those lost jennies. So to understand that, we have, I think, three slides ahead to things we have to keep in mind, and then I'll try to answer why do we need those jennies and what they truly represent. The first one is, of course, the father theme, which repeats all around the story. We saw it at the beginning, and then on chapter 10, where Samuel tells him that people will speak to him about his father. And another verse, which I skipped before, is where Saul is prophesying, and all the people around asking, what happened to the son of Kish, to the son of his father? And one of the people there said, but who is their father? Why are you so surprised? Once again, the father is mentioned here again. Their father, but he also means to Saul's father. What brought a scholar named Barbara Green to suggest 2 insights, which we have, once again, to bear in mind. First of all, that the father is 3 times imputed a concern for his son, which means overrides his anxiety over lost donkeys, because his father worries almost the same about the donkeys as he worries for his son. And she calls the donkeys as a red herring, in fact, in this scene of Kingmakers. Yeah, so I think
maybe you
donkeys,
should explain what is a red herring. I'm not sure everybody is familiar with the term.
Okay, red herring is a sort of size, how you call, well, let's take your English for that, because I don't know how to explain that in plain normal English. It's something that it should mistake you. I mean, it's not a real thing when you go hunting.
Right. So it's a clue that is supposed to be misleading rather than leading to the right place. It is distracting. It is misleading rather than assisting the plot.
Right. So sorry, I cannot answer the chat now. I'll go back to the chat again.
In English, obviously a decoy. No, also in American English, I was just making fun of Simon. Right.
Yeah, I'll go back to the Brits later. Once again, I admire the Brits. I'm sorry for my non-Shakespearean English grammar accent, etc.
He's sorry for Israeli independence of last 72 years. He wants to go back, to roll the thing back. Let's go to the British mandate, Peter.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
actually have a British citizenship. My mother was born in England, so I don't, I have a
Okay.
passport. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So
Go
let's go
ahead.
back to the red herrings. It means that something that they're not important. They seem to be important, but they are not. Here I debate her. I think they are important, but what's important is an interesting idea that Saul's father actually tested his son. He sent him to a mission. The mission was to find the Jennies. It doesn't matter. It could have been anything else. But this royal role, as she gave him, he failed it. That's why his father is so worried, not about the Jennies, but about that his son does not fulfill what he wanted. That's sort of her idea in a monograph she dedicated only to this Saul and Samuel encounter here. We shall take that in a limited point of view, but some point here is right. The father is very important here. That's what I call it, the father, the son, and the royal Jenny. That's the first thing. Yeah, you don't have to crucify now, but okay. Now, another very important thing is this enigmatic uncle, Dod. Dod, he, just before that, I remind you, at the end of the story, instead of meeting his father, he stumbles upon his uncle. Now, before that, Samuel tells him this. After that, thou shalt come to the hill of God, where the garrison of the Philistine. Watch this out. He told you go to a place called Hill of God, Givat Elohim, Giv'ah, and there are the garrison of the Philistines. Now Saul gets to that hill, that Giv'ah, and these three dots means he prophesied, the people asked, etc., etc. And right after that, came to the high place, Bama, which we may presume was right there at the hill. He came to the high place, and Saul's uncle said unto him, which means, may once again guess, his uncle was right there at the hill, at the high place of the hill. Now, why do I have to mention that? Because Saul, also we know in the end of the chapter, lived in a place called Gibeah. Gibeah. Okay, Gibeah. That brought another scholar named Ab Thomas in Vetus Testamentum to suggest this brilliant idea. His uncle was not his actual uncle at all, but his Philistine governor, the Netziv of verse 5 here, the garrison. Netziv Plishtim. What
Right. So
mean?
here there is kind of an ambiguity. The word Netziv could be representative, the commander of the garrison, or the representative delegation, or the representation.
Exactly.
So, right.
Exactly. He was their delegate. He claims that he wasn't even his uncle. He was, but we can say no. He was his uncle. By the way, his name was Ner. Ner was the brother of Kish, Saul's father, and Ner was the father of Avner ben Ner. If you remember, he was one day the chief general of the Israeli army. So it's possible that his father was a military figure, and the Philistine trusted him to be garrison of in that place in the Gibeah. And this uncle investigated Saul. And why? Because, as it says here, the Nevi'im, the prophets, two whose ecstasy so affected Saul, were notoriously nationalistic in outlook, at least in later times. In other words, it was a political incident when Saul, the son of the famous Kish, which his uncle was the governor there, finds himself between those anarchists, if I may use the modern word, sort of rebels in potential. So his uncle investigated, why did he do exactly? But you want to Samuel? What did Samuel tell him? Etc.
Right. So just a second to clarify the picture, to clarify this point, there is a representative of the Philistines governing, an acting governor for the Philistine, who is, according to the claim of the scholar, it's none other than the uncle of Saul, who is the governor at that area on behalf of the Philistines. And the fact that Saul is becoming a prophet doesn't sit well with the family, because the prophets in and of themselves tended to have nationalistic views. So that creates kind of a clash within the family.
Right. And you pointed what something interesting. The nationalistic view is what he said, but I have even a better idea. What's the problem with those prophets? But that's what he suggests. Once again, I'm taking the idea. I'm not committing myself to the entire details here. Now, the last thing we should notice, and has to do with the prophets and family. Now, this is something a bit more maybe conspirative, something which is between the lines or behind the scenes, if you like, but I think it's almost clear. The narrator is confronting Saul's family with Samuel, or with anything that Samuel represents. The first thing is the genealogy. We are introduced to Saul's family as now there was a man of Benjamin whose name was and he was the father and the son. This almost the same verse comes at Samuel 1:1. Samuel is also, now there was a certain man of time, has also a famous, a very prominent and important genealogy. What's more interesting, that Samuel's name should have been Shaul. Now I must use the Hebrew because the English here is not precise. When Hannah, his mother, prays, he says, Eli, אל הנער הזה התפללתי, ויתן אדוני לי את שאלתי, my petition here, אשר שאלתי, which I asked. It's not the same verb, but it should be. וגם אנוכי השאלתיהו, I have lent him, וכל הימים אשר היה הוא שאול. This is Saul, Shaul Adonai. So the reason Samuel was called Shmuel in Hebrew is because he is Shaul.
Right, so note, just a second, if we're already talking about
Yes.
the Hebrew, guys, note that the root of all of these highlighted words is the same root, Shin, Aleph, and Lamed. Used a little bit differently, a noun, a verb, and the name Shaul is actually a passive called participle masculine singular of this root. And Samuel is named Samuel because he is Shaul. It's a very improbable etymological explanation for the name of Samuel. It would be a perfect one for the name of Saul. It is a perfect one for the name of Saul, but it has nothing to do with Samuel, or at least nothing visible to do.
Yes, so what I think we can see from here is that the Bible, the author wants to compare, contrast between Samuel and Saul. From one side, they have, I would say, rival genealogies here. On the other hand, Saul is sort of a soulmate, if you like, of Samuel. He should have been him. Once again, keep that in mind. The second thing, and it's very clear in the story, is the ignorance that Saul is manifesting towards Samuel. What do I mean? When they come next to that town, his lad, his servant, knows that Samuel should be in town. Now, how comes that he knows, Saul doesn't know? Not only that he knows, the young maidens there have these entire verses. They're talking and murmuring all around about this prophet. And they not only that they know that Samuel is in town, they know exactly where he is, exactly what he's going to do. Now, the plain girl and the plain servant, the plain lad, they know everything. And Saul knows nothing. Not only that, maybe to emphasize that, Saul once again stumbles upon Samuel in the gate, and then Saul drew near to Samuel in the gate and said, "Tell me, I pray thee, where the seer's house is." And Samuel answered Saul and said, "I am the seer. What, don't you see?" No, the narrator wants us to feel that Saul is ignorant about Samuel. He has no idea about who he is, even when he sees him in the bright daylight.
Dr. Dentelski, if I may add just a point that I love pointing out when I teach this story. Note out of these two, Saul and the servant, who's got the sock money, what we call the sock money, when you keep some money inside of your socks just in case of an emergency. So the father is sending him and the servant, but he gives the servant the extra money for just in case money, the emergency fund. So it shows that Saul is really a boy here, and this is the quest in which he is supposed to transition to be a man, to be a king rather even. And again, that's part of the point that you're making.
Right, but I think once again I have a better explanation why the boy has the money and what Saul has. Here is next, and I declare that as now we're even. I think in bottom line, Saul's family has sort of a contempt or a detest. I don't know how to find the right harsh word in English towards Samuel. And to prove that, we must look exactly at this scene where Saul asks his boy, "Now, but behold, we go. What shall we bring the man? For the bread is spent in our vessels." This Samuel, this man of God of yours, So it says, so what he's working for? He's working for food, right? That's what he does. So his boy said, no, I've got money, which means his lad appreciates Samuel much more than Saul does. Now, just to remind us, an interesting verse in Ezekiel 15, where Ezekiel blames the women prophetesses, if you like, and will ye pollute me among my people for handfuls of barley and for pieces of bread to slay the souls that should not die? Which means prophets who work for food are false prophets. That's what Saul is hinting us here. I don't have bread for him. This guy works for bread, right? And now look at this pun here, which is once again only in Hebrew. He says, "Uman navi laish." What shall we bring is navi. Navi in Hebrew is, of course, prophet. Now, the verse next, or two verses after, the author suddenly plants this antiquar comment. Ki lanavi hayom ikare lefanim haroeh. For that, who is now called a prophet, was before time called a seer. Now, what's the great difference? Seer is something serious. It's somebody who sees. That's real. A prophet is something navi. Man navi laish. Saul says, this ish, this man is a navi. Is just a navi. In our words, is a magician. Is a lying magician. Nothing more than that. And how do we know that? Because later on in the story, the word navi is repeating again and again and again in what should be perceived as negative association. When Saul is prophesied there, what does he do exactly? We're not told exactly here. We only know that the people around are amazed. What? The son of Kish is prophesizing between the prophets? What's going on here? But in chapter 19, we have almost the same situation. And here we read what those prophets did. And Saul went to hunt David, and he found out that David is hiding at Samuel's place, and he went to catch him. And then Samuel was prophesying the other prophets, and he, Saul, stripped off his clothes and prophesied before Samuel in like manner, and laid down naked all that day and all that night. Whereof they say, Saul also among the prophets. And what we understand this entire Navi thing is that the prophets were perceived in a very bad or negative way by Saul's aristocrat family, if you like. We saw that Saul's family had a great genealogy, and they, once again, contempted, detested the prophet, those guys, which the only thing I could have thought of demonstrating that through, this verse at Hosea says, Israel shall know it, the prophet is a fool, the spiritual man is mad. Evil Hanavi Mishuga. Okay, spiritual is mad. That's what Hosea said. Now, I must try to demonstrate that with something a bit more modern. A modern prophet.
No, everything froze up.
Froze up. Listen, you shouldn't mess up with this guy. He's serious. Everything
I like
froze.
this guy. Just a second.
The video froze even. Listen, we had Dr. Moshe Rat last week. Someone started asking about Sefer Yetzirah, and the whole thing froze. you never know.
Sorry, but I've prepared myself because I wanted to show how the prophet were perceived by others. So the televangelists seem to be the great example. And by the way, this roaring Texan accent is a competitor to the British one. So I want to show a bit of that. But I prepared this too. Okay, we have the same thing. Sorry. The chief Israeli rabbi is here conducting a ceremony against COVID-19. I hope you can hear me. Not only here, but also at the helicopter. Okay.
That's the former chief rabbi, right?
Yeah, the former chief rabbi, sorry. I don't think it matters so much, which means if you want to feel, I don't know what you felt now, I'm sorry once again for the evangelist between you or the televangelist, but this phenomena of people of God or people who are prophesying, which means acting in what we perceive as weird ways, that's exactly how Saul's family felt towards Samuel, towards what he represents. So when Saul is prophesying, everybody is shocked. What? The son of Kish, that aristocrat guy, which his brother was the garrison of the, he's prophesying, he dwelled down to that level? Oh my. Okay, so now we can go back to those Jennies and try to explain
Just
after we.
just like one point, which I'm sure I'm just for the benefit of the crowd, I'm saying that trying to understand prophecy as one type of a prophecy is a little bit like overreaching, as we know that in the ancient Near East there were different types of prophets,
Right.
among which were definitely the Muhu and the Muhutu, which is literally the crazy ones, right? Ecstatic. Even the word ecstatic comes from that concept just in the Greek world. So this type of ecstatic prophecy, which is indeed to this very day perceived as highly unusual, is a real thing, but it definitely doesn't cover the whole world of how prophets were perceived.
Okay, but that's
It's a
why I quoted
type of
Hosea. When Hosea said that's what the people think, that Navi
right,
is not this messenger like Isaiah, Jeremiah, which his job is not to see things or to make magics. His job was to uh, uh,
right.
um, be
There's
get to
definitely an image of the crazy prophet in the Bible, and
right.
and to this very day, no doubt about that.
Okay, so I once again the Saul family thought, or Saul himself, why doesn't he recognize someone? It's not he doesn't give a damn for him. I mean, he says, "This, who is he? I don't know. I'm not interested." Even when he sees him, he doesn't recognize him. But the plain people, of course, they love him. That's why his servant knows, and that's what those maidens there, men, girls know about him, and that should explain us why is Saul's father, which we started with, was so worried about the Jennies and about his son. Now, Jennies in the Bible, and that should be clear, so I'll jump ahead all these verses. Jennies or
Yeah.
asses means kingdom, royalty, kingness, whatever you like. Okay, that's clear. The judge's sons rode on horses. You know, he has 30 sons, rode on 30 asses or colts, and the kings themselves.
Zechariah is like the best, I
Right,
think. Yeah.
right.
הנה
Jesus will
מלכך
come.
יבוא לך, צדיק הוא
Yeah,
ונושע, עני ורוכב על חמור,
right.
ועל עיר
Lowly
בין
and
אתונות.
ride
Right.
this verse here, which is, of course, once again, Jesus according to the Christian tradition. And this is clear. When we say Jennies or asses, we mean kingdom. We can refer to them as kingdom. So, no, and also of course, I remind you again, we saw that on the last lecture, where in the archaeological findings, we also found a ceremonial burning of donkeys with kings. And I found another very interesting Hittite epic, which talks about the queen of Kanesh, where her 30 sons, princes, rode on donkeys. Of course, everybody showed the connection between these 30 sons riding on donkeys and 30 judges' sons rode on 30 donkeys, etc. So the connection between king and asses, donkeys, is quite clear from the Bible and outside the Bible. So now, what we have to remind us all what we learned until now is that Saul's family, as I would say, had a sort of rival genealogy to that of Samuel. They are competing him. He has his genealogy, and they have their own. They're aristocrats.
Sure, it goes the other way around as well. Remember, guys, that Samuel is personally offended when the people come to him to ask for
As
a
for a
king,
king,
right?
exactly.
Because he is leading the people at that point. So he is offended both principally because he doesn't think Israel should have a king, and he is offended on the personal note because it's not him nor his sons. So it goes. There are good reasons to feel that tension.
And now, once again, Samuel should have been called Saul, Shaul, Lemk, and Saul doesn't know Samuel, so to say. And once again, Saul is perceiving Samuel as a Navi, and not as a Ro'eh, not as a seer, which is a serious profession, if you may say, but as a prophet, a crazy guy, crazy magician, or wackos, as I found another interesting word. Maybe that's the word. Wackos. Okay. Also has something very American in it. By the way, America is the country where all these televangelists, they do it for bread, yeah, for money. And they take a lot of money for the things, and that, I think, happens only in America. Maybe I should have put a trigger warning for Europeans here. No, I mean, that's only in the
No,
United
and
States of
you're
America,
listen.
as far as I know.
Nobody can teach the church in Europe to get, they have been doing
Okay.
that for 2,000 years. The amount of
Yeah.
golds and
Right.
whatnot,
But they had class. They had
they have,
class.
listen, the other guys could work for many years. They wouldn't amass the stuff that they have been hoarding over the past two
Okay.
millennia.
So now we are also with the Catholic. We have a problem with the Catholic Church now. Okay. Is there any other sector we didn't offend yet?
Yeah, we
The
can
Muslim.
offend rabbis now because some rabbis
I
do
did
it
also.
as well. So yeah.
Right. So money is always the thing behind. But in the United States, it's the dollar says that in God we trust. I think God says in dollar I trust. That's American theme. So now that's Saul's uncle is there, the governor. And shortly, if I may summarize this entire thing, Saul's father, he thinks that he lost his son to the prophet, to Samuel. Instead of a normal or maybe a secular leader, his son will be a prophetic king. That's what makes him so worried. So he's worried about the Jennies. It means he's worried about the kingdom or the royalty virtue of his son, which should have been a king, but not a sort of a king that Samuel appoints, as happened later on, but a king of the Benjaminite, his genealogy, which means, once again, a sort of a secular king. His cousin is the governor by the Philistines. So he should have been sort of once again, a secular king. But his father feels that he lost Jennies to Samuel. And that's what the whole story is about. And that's the end of this session, I must go on, when Samuel meets him, what he says to him. And as for thine asses that were lost 3 days ago, which means the aspiration, the royal aspirations of your family, set not around them, or they are found. Right now, I found you. You are the king to be. But, and to whom is all the desire of Israel, is it not on thee and all thy father's house? That's sort of an irony. Your father's house had his aspirations of what kingdom should look like. But in the end, I shall pick you and I shall make you a king as I want, which means a prophetic king, as happened in the 10th chapter. That's, in short words, the Samuel story. Back later to the chats, sort of once again. And now let's go to the reason we're here, which is 1 Kings 13, the real weird stories of prophets and donkeys altogether. So since you read the story, I once again will I will quote only the verses which mention this donkey. So in verse 13, after he hears that once again, we have two protagonists here. Later on, we have three, the donkey too. But the first is the man of God, which came from Judea, and the old prophet of Bethel. Now, when the old prophet hears what the man of God has done to Jeroboam and all that scene, he said unto his sons, "Sell me the ass." So they sold him the ass, and he rode thereon. Now, the question is clear. You already know, why do we need this twice? After the crucial invitation, I don't know how to call that, all that scene, which is the main part of the story, I jump above it. After and it came to pass, after he had eaten bread and after he had drunk, that he saddled for him the ass to wait for the prophet whom he had brought back. This is a very tough. La here is translated to wait for the. Okay, so somebody saddles the donkey for somebody else, and it's quite clear that the old prophet saddles the donkey to the man of God. And what happens next? Of course, a lion finds him, and his carcass was cast away, and the ass by it. The ass stood next to his old man, the man of God carcass, and the lion also stood by the carcass. These are the first 1, 2, 3, 4 mentions of the donkey here. And now, amazingly enough, that's why I said we need to learn Samuel before, because here too we have another 4 mentions of the donkey, and a total we have 8 mentions of the donkeys here, exactly like the 8 Jennies of Saul and Samuel. Interesting, I don't have any idea why exactly 8, but maybe it tells us something. And he spake to his son after he hears that this man of God that was killed by the lion. He says to his son once again, saying, "Saddle me the ass." And he saddled him. This time, the author satisfied with this, and he went and found his carcass cast on the way. And in Hebrew, it's v'chamor, not v'hachamor. So an ass and the lion standing by the carcass. Maybe it's intentional, maybe it's not. And once again, the lion didn't eat the carcass and didn't nor torn the ass. And the last verse we'll find the here is, and the prophet took up the carcass of the man of God and laid it upon the ass and brought it back. And here there's what I think is a mistake. It's not only in this translation, but JPS, sorry. What's written here in Hebrew is Vayeshivehu, he brought him back, Vayavo el ir hanavi hazaken, and he came to the old prophet's city. Ir, the city of Navi Hazaken, old prophet. But what he translated is, and the old prophet came to this city, which is not right. And why is it so important? Because there is sort of a discrepancy here. That's why he changed the translation. It's said, we're talking now about the subject here is this old prophet. Vayisah Navi, Vayavo el ir, it should have been Vayavo el iro, and he came back to his city. He's mentioned here. Why should we say ir hanavi hazaken, to the city of the old prophet, as if they are two different people? So you have to keep that in mind too. Once again, we have 8 mentioning of the donkey here, and it's obvious that this donkey has some sort of function. And amazingly enough, all the scholars agree that something with the donkey and the lion, by the way, is weird, is peculiar, and we must use them somehow. And that's, of course, because the entire narrative is so enigmatic and weird that the scholars held in each and every detail they could in order to try to understand what's going on. So let's see some, what I would call conventional commentaries. So we have Nelson in his commentary. He said all of these saddling of the donkey, etc., is just internal transitional sections which are to delay the drama. It means to ease things around. It's very full of tension. So sometimes we have an ass here and there in order to calm down. Now, Bodner has sort of the same idea. He said all of these actions of saddling the ass are sort of pastoral actions. Once again, his book is called Jeroboam's Royal Drama. Once again, it's to ease the drama. Now, Cassuto has a more interesting and a more literary explanation. Moshe David Cassuto, Professor Moshe David Cassuto, which was one of the greatest researchers on the Ugarit scriptures, tablets, and he found the same, what he called phrases or formulas of speech in those epic writings from Ugarit.
Right, this goes back, by the way, to similarities between Hebrew literature and Greek literature in that sense that you have like fixed formulas. Cyrus Gordon wrote about it, but generally you have kind of a building blocks that you kind of use. So it's not limited to the ancient Near East. I'm saying, we can see it around the Mediterranean basin.
Exactly. Same in the Iliad and the Odyssey. And what he says, when we hear that he saddled the donkey once again and here again, and he said to his son, it doesn't have any importance. It's just part of the way those epics are written. That's Cassuto. And the last one is Benjamin Oppenheimer, which is a bit tired of all this explanation. He just said this: the tiring and tedious use, repetition, without any artistic need, is a result of the long transmission process unto the current. That's all. Stop looking for all kind of weird explanations. It's the text. It went through a lot of history. So, yeah, right, it's tiring and tedious.
I think he got tired of thinking about it. He said,
so
okay, it's okay, that's just is.
The nature of the story. Yeah, if you don't have anything better to do, okay, so make a lecture about it, go become a doctor of animals. But, it's just get the text. Transmission. Okay, now, but we have some more, we call eccentric commentary. Because of this story is so weird, look what the scholars, very serious guys, suggested. Here we have Sweeney in his commentary on Kings. He says that each of the animals has symbolic significance, and the ass, Hamor in Hebrew, is associated with the city of Shechem. Shechem, Hamor, son of a donkey, which was the city of Shechem, a place of deception and lies. Which means when we hear Hamor in this story a lot of times, we have to just imagine, what is Hamor? It's Shechem, it's that city, Nablus. Oh, that city of lying. Oh, so this prophet is a lying prophet. Something like that. Another idea by David Marcus is that the entire story, he says, is a satire. A satire reading indicates that the principal concern of the story is to satirize its targets, like the story of Balaam and his donkey. He says exactly like we have this donkey or Jenny at the Balaam's narrative, as if without any need. It's mentioned there so many times, just for ridiculing Balaam. The same happens here. It's to make fun or satire, of the entire protagonist in the story. That's his opinion. He has all kind of other proofs of that. Something even more eccentric is J.K. Mead, which suggests that the literary significance of the donkey leads to subtle identification between the king, Jeroboam, and the donkey. In other words, the narrator is calling Jeroboam an ass. Yes. Okay, which means we see or hear or read about this ass so many times, but the donkey, you have to keep in mind, that Jeroboam, he's laughing on him. Oh, that's so funny. Okay, these are their explanations. And as I said bluntly, for the last session, I have a better explanation. So let's jump to it. Okay, once again, I won't show it. I just use because he's saying here that he is a prophet of God. He's saying that clearly here. And of course, we see here his ass. But let's skip that for now. And let's take one commentator which had in mind a bit deeper, a bit more interesting idea about the donkey here. And that is Uriel Simon, which you can see, he is relating to this verse where the old prophet is saddling the ass for the man of God. That gesture that Simon eyes, he has, that's what he says about it. I'll try to make it short. He says that the real protagonist of the story, according to Simon, is the Word of God. The story wants to show us that the Word of God is overcoming all the objections it has. So, in a non-human protagonist such as the Word of God, a psychological reason is required only for granting vital basic power to the dramatic internal turn of the human protagonists. In other words, when we see here anything else but the Word of God, it means that there is a sort of a psychological need to explain what the other protagonists or minor protagonists, that is the man of God and the prophet, what they have in mind. So in order to depict or to manifest that, the story uses all kind of means. Okay, so this gesture in his eyes, and only this gesture he plays onto that, is what he calls, in the divine level, the deed, this saddling, is to be perceived as the old prophet's initial acknowledgement in the mighty power of the sign wish to void. Okay, so this is a bit of blurry words here. I try to translate it from Hebrew. It's worse in Hebrew. What he's saying is that the actions of the man, of the prophet with the donkey, are sort of gestures which are manifesting his internal feelings, the dramatic turn that he has inside him. In order to understand that, let's just take a look at one more important thing, which I hope Netanel show you that. What I call the missing
we've talked
donkey.
about it on Sunday, right? We've seen how we have everything repeating itself with one exception, that is the donkey.
Exactly. Right. We see here the narrator tells us there were a carcass, there was an ass, and there was a lion. But the people saw the carcass and the lion, and they saw no donkey and no ass, because actually say there was no ass. Of course, like in the story of Balaam, he said he rode on maybe in a horse, but his ass, his Jenny, there was just his internal feelings. The same goes here. And I quote again this beautiful Sherlock Holmes piece, where when something is missing, it calls for interpretation. Yeah, I'll read it to you. Detective asks Holmes for any other point to which you would wish to draw my attention. So Holmes said, to the curious incidents of the dog in the nighttime. So Gregory replies, but the dog did nothing in the nighttime. That was the curious incident, replies Holmes, which means when something is missing, it's not just missing for no reason. There is a reason for that. So, to keep in mind, and now I should reread the narrative here with you, that donkey here is none else but the old prophet himself. What do I mean? Let's start without the slide. What's the story about? The story is about a man of God which comes and prophesies that something is going to happen in several years or centuries later, and he makes a sign when Jeroboam's hand is dried upon the altar. And then we found that we hear about this old prophet. Why is he an old prophet? I would suggest He's a sort of what we call today a skeptist, which means he once was a prophet. He once believed in the word of God, but now he's old. He doesn't believe it anymore. And so do not his sons. So when his sons, in the next generation, which maybe is more plausible, ready to believe, they hear about this man of God who came from Judea and made that miracle. He, once again, it reminds us Saul's family versus Samuel, is suspecting that this is all kind of a show. So he decides to make what I call a little move. And he said, I'll make this prophet, this man of God, yeah, to expose his real face. But he's sort of a liar. I know that. I was there, been there and done that. So when he said to his sons, saddle me the ass, it means he's forcing himself to what I call a venture, a crucial or a little journey. Exactly like Abraham in the binding of Isaac's story. When Abraham, the first thing in the morning he does is to saddle his ass, which means to force himself to go to a risky mission. And that's exactly what the old prophet is doing here, because he knows it's life and death here. If his trick, if his plan will succeed, somebody is going to die. So he has to saddle his ass. And the sons should do that because they told him about the story. He was at home. They told him. And later on, he brings the man of God to his home and he makes him eat and drink, which means to violate the word of God here. And after they eaten bread and had drunk, and sorry, what happens here, I didn't quote it, but both of them hear the word of God, which says to the old man, to the man of God, you have faith. That's why you're going to die. And here, the old prophet is shocked. He understands that maybe the word of God is right. Maybe he was wrong. He was a skeptic for no reason. Because look, he managed to lie, to deceive to that man of God, but it didn't come over notice. Yeah, God knew about it. God is going to punish. So now what he has to do is saddle the ass for the old man, which means, by interpretation, he sort of splits himself to two. He surrenders himself to the man of God and said, my part, I said, the part of me which believes in the word of God will go with you, man of God. I am your ass now. So he saddles him the ass. And half of him is staying behind in his home. He said, maybe not. Let's wait and see. If he's not going to die, that means I was right. The word of God is a false, is a lie, because he didn't die. But he will die. Well, I don't know. Once again, his heart is torn into two. Exactly, once again, like Balaam. When Balaam went to curse Israel, he wanted to curse. God warned him, don't curse. So he sort of split himself to Balaam and his Jenny. Here, it's him and the ass. So he goes with the ass. What happens? Of course, the lion kills the man of God, and the ass is staying there. Nobody sees it, of course, because there was no ass there. Of course, it was the soul, if you like, the soul of that old prophet. So this half prophet is waiting there to the other prophet to there. I say that the guy who stayed, the prophet who stayed back home at Bethel to admit that he failed. The word of God is right. And what happens next? Like that, when he hears that the lion killed the man of God, which means the word of God is true, now he understands he failed. All of his life are so shattered. So he says once again to his sons, which are also guilty of that, saddle me the ass, and once again, that's another ass. There were two asses there. One that will carry the man of God, and the other one is this, which are the two halves of that old prophet. And when he gets there and found the carcass and the ass and the lion standing there, of course, it means that this ass is sort of a psychological representation of him. Thus invisible, yeah, of course. Nobody sees that, exactly like the servants of Balaam and the ministers of Barak there didn't hear or didn't see all this long argument he had with his Jenny there. They say not a single word because it didn't really happen. It was in a dream, as some commentators suggested there. And at the end, what is he doing? He takes the carcass of the man of God and lays it upon the ass. And that is taken the translation. And look at this verse, why it's so important. the prophet is, the verse sees two prophets here. And the prophet, the half which made the mistake, took up the carcass of God, and he came to the old prophet city. It's like another guy. That's the second half. That's why the verse relates to them as two different people, two different entities. The first one is coming, is the, let me say, the right one, the one who admits the word of God, and the second one is the one who denies the word of God. Now, both of them have to come back to what I call to bear the consequences of that terrible deed he did. So, in other words, the entire narrative is about, as Simon said, the word of God. But the protagonist here is the old prophet. He is the one that the entire narrative is aimed to. It's not Jeroboam, and it's not man of God. It's only this old prophet, which represents what I call, or sort of a skeptic, I don't know how to say that, a man that was prophet, was a man of God, and left it. And now he denies the word of God in the ears of his sons. But when he is confronted with a man of God who comes, he tries to test him. And this test, this lethal test, is manifested to us, the readers, through his asses, through the two parts of his soul. One who somehow deep inside do believe in the word of God, and the other side that doesn't. And once again, he saddles his ass, which means forces him to go, and brings the man to him, the old man, or the man of God, to his house, saddles him the ass again, which means you were right, I was wrong, but maybe not. Let's wait and see. You have two asses. One stays back at Bethel, and one is going to the man of God. And when he finds out that the man of God was right, though he was dead, then he goes with the second ass, and the two asses, I may say, come back to Bethel, admitting their failure. And that's the bottom line of the story. The word of God is always right. Here, once again, I have a sort of a nice picture which shows how even a beast soul can be like human souls. Well,
Beautiful picture.
Of course, this is
Yeah.
if you have anything, but if we have time to chat.
Yeah. So yeah, I'll maybe say a word or two. First of all, fun and enriching and intellectual as always, and I enjoyed it too much. But I think I was left few bridges back, in the sense that it was few bridges too far for me in several regards. One, if so is the case, and he intentionally led to the death of the man of God, then he is committing a crime and someone else is paying the price. That's a little bit at odds with me. Secondly, obviously, later on we have the donkey that was the two donkeys. I'll make a different point and then I'll go back to it. The explanation about the difficulty in the text with El Ir Hanavi Zaken is a real difficulty, but I think it is better explained in tools of textual criticism, such as a gloss, like Hi Ha'ira Gedola in Genesis, because of the ambiguity of the verse. So a gloss that was unsurprisingly put into the wrong place. So I would read this verse. I would, again, consider textual criticism as a tool here, rather than an elaborate allegorical or psychological reading of this. And thirdly, maybe I lost that point. So you have the donkey of the prophet and the donkey of the man of God, right? So which of
the donkeys of the prophet? Yeah, the man of God came by foot. That's almost clear from the story. He didn't come with a donkey.
Okay.
And he sat below that tree over there.
It does that he sits. It does it that he goes. Well, so how which? So you only see one donkey in this story, or two donkeys?
No, two. I see two asses here, and there is even a picture. Just a second, I'll try to find it out.
Because the point that I want to make is that there is a donkey that was not torn by the lion. So it has to be an actual donkey that was not torn by the lion. That's part of the miracle, to show like only the man of God was harmed, and even that was not done because the lion was hungry, but because of a direct instruction of God and a punishment for what it did wrong. So
what I'm going to say. Okay, once again, the man of God took the old prophet, saddled his ass, which means his good part, I may say, the part of him that believes in the word of God, and sent it away with that man of God. So it shouldn't die, because that's the part which was right. Now, why the man of God did die? Because that's one of the points of the story. The word of God is so right that it's right above any other human consideration of, wow, it's not fair or something like that. The entire Bible is full with injustice, things like that.
But
So,
what about the donkey that was not torn? That has to be an actual donkey, right?
What?
Or not?
Okay, no, not, because the people didn't see it. That's the missing
No.
donkey.
But there is the donkey that was not torn in verse, I think, 28.
First of all, let me share, with your permission, this nice picture. I don't remember by who. It shows really two donkeys here. His donkey and the other one, which he didn't touch, because this is his. Both of them are him, actually. So now the verses. Let's go back to the verses. Just let me share the verses here. I've got you. Share the entire screen again. Okay. Here. So yeah, okay. This is the first donkey, which where is he settled in? Here, verse 23. Now we have some people who raised hands. Just think I don't know how to handle that.
Okay, we'll get to that in a second, but just this is
we'll unmute
the donkey. The donkey for the man of God.
Here in the chatting and in the participants part. So this is the first donkey. This is.
Okay, Dr. Dentelski. Is it just me without a connection, or guys, can you hear me?
Okay.
Evidently, I was asking too many questions.
Okay.
Dr. Dentelski decided to get rid of me. Right.
Okay.
Right.
Okay, I have a quick statement, a question, or just a statement on the story. I found it very interesting. I do believe that you were right, that the story is about the old prophet and the significance of it, because I look at it this way: if you have a policeman in town, why do you send for another policeman to come in and do the work? And so if this old prophet was truly a prophet, he could have stood up to Jeroboam and condemned the altar and so forth to try to correct the situation. But again, the silence of the old prophet to me is deafening. And so again, how he responded when he did receive an inspiration from God, it was to clarify that the younger prophet did not do what was right, but by lying to him, he was trying to receive a little bit of the old glory that he once might have had in his profession. But if he would have been a true prophet, he would have told and corrected Jeroboam what he was doing was wrong, changing the dates, changing the festivals, doing these things that were incorrect. And so I do think it was a lesson for the old prophet.
Okay. Yeah, just a second. Let's see. Yeah, Monica, do you want to ask a question?
No, I just my mind.
Okay.
I think he cleared up the.
Okay, so let me mute the microphone to make it. And Mignonette, I see your hand is up.
Yes, I want to go back to the matter with Eve and the serpent,
Yeah.
because if that was her fallen nature, as it was, she wasn't fallen as yet, and also she had free will, so she could choose. But when you think of what God said to Cain, when Cain, before he killed Abel, God said to him, you have the choice. It's at your door. This fallen nature or this sin is at your door. And you have the choice either to resist it and do what is right, or to let it overpower you. And when you think of what God said to the snake, and that continued on regarding when she had Cain, and she thought that Cain would be the redeemer, and also when Noah was born and they thought he would be the redeemer. So if it was her fallen nature, how do you fit all of those in?
Okay, I don't, but yeah, it's a complicated story, the story of the Garden of Eden, which combines, I think, at least two levels. First is the obvious, the mythological level, and that's why there is the basic question should have been asked: why a serpent and not a donkey? What's wrong with the other stories are all donkeys? Because there was sort of חשבון פתוח, how to say it in English, God had
open score. You can say open score.
Open score, yeah, with the mythology there. So he had to settle that first. So he used the serpent, and that's why he punished the serpent. And although saying to emphasize that these serpent, these so-called primordial powers, are nothing in compared to God. That's why the serpent is there, and that's why he's punished. But in the narrow narrative of Eve speaks or argues with the serpent, that's another level of the narrative, which wants to say that, I said it back then, the main theme of the entire Bible, almost, I may say, is the man versus God, or man to obey or to disobey. That is the question. Most of the Bible deals with that. So in every narrative, we can find that. We probably are right if we interpret that in that way. So somebody asked here, I say it correctly, Simon, how come it took 2.5K years to decipher that? Or maybe those people understood that. I mean, so my interpretation is so, modern. It looks, what, did they understand that way? I think, yes, it was clear that in every story, you better find out what does it tell us as human beings versus God, because people lived with God immanent in their lives. So they had to obey all the time. That was part of the Israeli life, at least, and the other nations too. So every narrative which you can interpret that meaning, I think that's a good interpretation before all the other ones, political and all the other metaphors.
Okay, thank you very much, so much for coming again, Dr. Dentelski. I enjoyed, Avi, right? I enjoyed your lecture, and I'm sure everybody did. I know you will put it on Facebook and YouTube, so I'll send a link to everybody because I know that I would have to have a second watch to get all the nooks and crannies of it. Right. So I'll get the link and I'll send everybody later the link if you permit that.
Yeah, but permission. I didn't record it myself. Sorry,
I did. Don't worry. Okay, I did, and I can send it to you if you want to edit out my jokes or whatnot.
Yeah, no, it's good.
And and that's it for today, guys. Tomorrow we have Professor Tov, and Thursday we have something for a Jerusalem Day, as well as me continuing our series about the history of the Hebrew language. And that's it for today. As always, a pleasure. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you very much.
Thank you.